What is up guys, Noli here and welcome to my review of the Street Sweeper shotgun from the Gage Shotgun Pack DLC. So as you guys heard, we will be reviewing the Street Sweeper, one of the 3 new shotguns added within the Gage Shotgun Pack, and I'm going to be looking at each ammo type, how it affects the gun, and even how different attachments can allow for very different experiences with this weapon. But obviously I'm going to be using a build throughout these tests, so the Rhinefield is the shotgun of choice, with all the bells and whistles on it as you're seeing here. We'll get into the Street Sweeper itself, its modifications that I choose to use, and how I will move them around throughout the gameplay in a little bit. I'm just going to further explain what this series is going to be. It is going to be a series, not particularly entitled anything, but I will review all of these shotguns, and alongside them look, not in very much depth, but at a melee weapon added within this most recent DLC. So we're going to be looking at the shotguns and indeed the ammo, and then in the final video we're just going to be focusing on the ammo and how it changes all of the shotguns. The melee weapon we're going to be looking at today is the CLAS Shovel. Really fun weapon to use if you ask me, but just your standard run-of-the-mill melee weapon really. Armor types I'm going to fluctuate throughout, but I honestly found that the lightweight ballistic was the most consistent. You want to have reasonable mobility with this gun particularly. Equipment wise, we bring ammo almost all the time. When you can't regenerate that custom ammo very easily with fully loaded, definitely worth picking up the ammo bag. Is it fully loaded? I forget what it's called. That's awful. One final thing to take a quick look at are my skills. I have changed them around very slightly. I just got the first fully loaded just because I'm not messing around with that aced part, because you know, we're using custom ammo on the whole. Sprinter aced instead. I did talk about that in my skill video, and endurance. This is just the way I've changed it around very slightly. Let's now take a proper look at the secondary weapon, which is of course the weapon of the day, the Street Sweeper shotgun. We have a pretty huge magazine size on this thing, 12 base. Like, that is extremely good with those 2 skills. The Mag Plus skills, we're going to have 15 extra. There's 60 ammo overall, but that obviously fluctuates as we're using special ammo types. The rate of fire really is not too bad. The damage is high, but it doesn't really compete with the locomotive, which we'll get onto later, which is the other option as a secondary shotgun. Accuracy, stability, all fine. The concealment is not that great. You can bring it up to a reasonable value, but it still won't compete with the locomotive in that area either. We'll talk about that again, talking as a possible hybrid stealth weapon. So let's actually first of all preview how it looks. This is how I'm using it for most of the missions that I go in. Looks absolutely fantastic. You guys will recognize it as the Striker shotgun from games like Call of Duty. Okay, so the ammunitions you'll see popping up on screen as I'm using the separate ones. Now as far as the barrel is concerned, you can choose to run the suppressed barrel, but I actually at no point choose to use that. I instead use the long barrel throughout, and I do put on the silent killer at one point just to test it out, see how it reduces the damage and range, but it really isn't too bad. The shark teeth is always the way you really want to go. Extra damage is always better. I do bring the tactical laser module because concealment isn't really a worry, and I choose the speculator sight with this nice green reticle because I found like the shotguns appreciated wider reticles, and I genuinely don't like the iron sights for these things on the whole, so I definitely advise a sight on them. So that is the setup we are using. Like I say, at one point I do swap over to the silent killer, and ammunition changes throughout. I'll talk about how it differs, what they're strong for, and just how consistently they are strong as we get to those points in the gameplay. Guys, I hope you enjoy. Okay, so let's start by looking at the standard ammo. This is, of course, without a silencer. Now, there are a couple of things I'm rating this on. Same way I used to with my gun reviews. It's the sustainability, the damage, and particularly increasingly since the bulldozers got better, your ability to take out specials, shields, bulldozers, and tasers. So, and cloakers, I suppose, but cloakers, pretty much every weapon type can take out cloakers if you're fast enough. But you notice I'm staring off against a bulldozer here, and there isn't an awful lot I can do with this specific standard round. I am taken down, but that's probably going to be the case with most rounds other than the AP. But this is still a shotgun, don't forget, so the second you break through that helmet, that bulldozer is gone. And you notice how quickly I can react to shoot, and that's an immediate kill, which saves my life. As far as range of this gun is concerned, particularly with this standard ammo type, it's really not too bad. You notice me picking off that taser as I get absolutely demolished by the sniper, but I am able to hit him, admittedly not for consistent amounts of damage. There was 10 on that one and 2 on the one following it, but it's not too shabby, this gun at range, so long as you're consistent with your hits. But the standard ammunition is definitely not the best way to go. Flechette and probably explosive rounds do a better job of that, but we'll get onto that more so later. As far as sustainability goes, this is undoubtedly the best way to go with it, and it's one of the reasons why I believe it's the best setup, unfortunately. You notice my screen goes monochrome. I actually quite like the monochrome recording. So basically, because fully loaded works on standard ammunition, you're just going to have so much more ammo overall, and of course there are no ammo penalties for running standard. Oh my god, the stopping power and double tap on this thing. If you fire quickly into a corridor, nothing is getting out alive. But was that not the same on the locomotive? Well, depends on how you look at it. This thing is undoubtedly satisfying, and point blank, its lack of damage won't be noticeable, but compared to the locomotive, it really has not got the same stopping power. What it does have, though, is larger clip sizes, even from a base without the Mag Plus. It's really quite efficient at range, and with this ammo type, you're definitely not going to be running out of ammo, but unfortunately the slightly slower than usual reload is going to keep you reloading an awful lot of the time. Like I say, this ammo doesn't do anything special, but it does everything average, and honestly, I'd rather see consistency than excelling in very specific small fields. As long as it gets the job done, I feel like the best ammo to take with you is most probably, if you're running this as a primary instead of a secondary, the standard ammunition. If you're not, there are definitely some other interesting choices that I'm going to get onto and cover in a minute. Enjoy the rest of the gameplay. Up next, we are looking at the high explosive round. Really impressive looking, at the very least. You see some clips where I'm launching enemies about 10 feet in the air. It's really fun to play around with, and it really amplifies that satisfying feeling. One thing I didn't fully cover is the standard rounds have a really hard time against shields. If you don't have the ability to knock back shields with a melee, which is of course a difficult skill to unlock at the very top of the enforcer tree, you may have a really tough time if you're playing on your own and you run into a group of shields. The explosive rounds, on the other hand, will have no problem stunning and walking past that. One thing to note is this thing with explosive rounds actually has some decent range. If you can land complete body shots at range, you're going to do the standard damage. As far as I can tell, because it's the explosion itself that does the damage, there is no drop-off so long as it makes contact. One thing that I will mention in the final video where we're analysing how the ammo works is fluctuation in pellets and spacing and things like that. Well, this thing doesn't fluctuate nearly as much as other types of buckshot, for example, so you can be relatively consistent with this. And as I mentioned previously, if you're running this as more of a secondary as opposed to your main weapon, it's definitely a nice option where you can stun shields out and take them out with your primary weapon. Be aware though, this thing runs out of ammo so quickly, and with no connection to the ability to pick up extra rounds, 75% extra with fully loaded, you're really going to have a hard time sustaining this, so only use it at very specific times and as a secondary. I do not feel it's a viable primary, and it has some real drawbacks in that you're going to be losing money from using this. Particularly on this mission, you'll see I spray all over the place and I kill numerous civilians. The blast radius is high, and its blast kill ability is similar to grenades, much greater than it is. It's much easier to kill civilians with this than it is to kill guards, is what I'm trying to say. Armoured guards will take far too many shots to go down, but your standard cops will go down very quickly, particularly at range. As I said, it really isn't a bad shout if you want to be taking out enemies from range. And honestly, this is the most impressive looking and one of the most satisfying ammo types that I've used. I definitely advise picking it up and trying it out, seeing if you can use it amongst the build, but definitely not focusing on it primarily. So, just to talk very briefly about the CLAS shovel, the melee weapons within this update are relatively strong, particularly this and the baton. They both have high knockdown, which is important. You can get rid of things like shields, which you couldn't otherwise with your things like standard buckshot shotguns. Basically, this is the baton with slightly less knockdown and a little more damage, but what it does have is the advantage of making a brilliant noise when it hits things. Very satisfying to use to do things like break through glass. And finally, I feel like its width gives it a slightly bigger hitbox, but that might just be me. Up next, we are looking at the 000 buckshot. A pretty cool concept that I don't think was quite pulled off well enough on the Street Sweeper. The idea is it increases the damage, and it does so by 8 exactly. However, on some of the primary counterparts, it can increase it by up to 15, which at which point you may see a genuine difference. The issue is it reduces the spread, which means you're going to be hitting multiple enemies and multiple body areas less frequently, which is in itself a slight problem. The extra damage you will see, it's all about hitting damage caps. Enemies have certain amounts of health. If you can surpass that damage cap, you will notice a huge difference. So it may be instead of shooting a taser twice, you'll be able to shoot him once in the body and kill him thanks to the Street Sweeper. Well, it's inconsistent. It really depends on the builds. As far as Enforcers are concerned, you're not going to see a lot of difference with this. Enforcers already have a big setup with shotgun skills, and pushing up their damage just that 8 higher is not going to really make a difference to the number of shots it's taking. So really all you're doing is hampering your ammo count, and hurting yourself overall. So this is definitely not my recommended ammo type of choice. It's certainly not too bad against things like tasers, and you're going to have a better time trying to body shot a bulldozer, but you don't want to do that anyway, really. So overall, there's not a lot of redeeming qualities with this, other than you can get it without the DLC, so you can give it a go. Definitely a miss on the ammo, in my opinion. We might see a slight boost to it over time. One thing we were hoping it changed was made your shotguns more effective over range. It does, but only slightly, and only really on the Moscone from what I've felt. So definitely not a Street Sweeper attachment if you ask me. This is just really hampering yourself overall, and you can see that from the gameplay. I might as well just be using the standard ammunition. So as far as AP rounds are concerned, they do cover for some of the biggest defects within the shotguns. You can take out shields, but I feel almost like the damage needs to be amplified through shields. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but it still takes maybe 3 shots through the shield to kill them, which just isn't economic ammo-wise. So it kind of loses out what it's meant to do. Again, you're not going to have an easy time body shotting a bulldozer. I believe it's going to it's going to be less difficult to shoot through enemies within corridors and things. That is definitely a plus, allowing for greater multi-kills, more kills with single shots, saving ammo that way. It's definitely not a bad ammo type, but remember you are losing ammo again, and what you're gaining is absolutely debatable based around the missions. If you are in maybe a nightclub, or maybe a Rats, I suppose. Rats is probably the best example I can think of. This may be a good pick for you, because you're going to be able to shoot down the staircase, hitting as many enemies as possible. Shields walking up will also be taken back. Definitely not a bad choice circumstantially on certain missions, but not something you want to consistently be running. It's just outdone by a lot of the other ammo types. Don't forget, you're not going to be losing damage, but you are just going to be losing sustainability, which is one of the most important things. Over range, the thing performs exactly the same as any other ammo type, really, other than the flechette, which performs slightly better, but we'll get onto that later. Its specific reason for being is worse than the snipers, right? So the sniper can shoot through shields. Even the rattlesnake will probably take out a shield with 2 shots. Whereas this thing often takes up to 3 even at close range. So I feel like while you are gaining something that the shotgun didn't used to have, just jumping around the side of them, or possibly meleeing them if you have the right skill setup, or even more conveniently chucking a grenade at them is going to have the same effect. So this is a miss unless you're in very specific missions or have a very specific cagey playstyle. Looking at the flechette, I was actually surprised because I imagined anything that reduced damage would be worse, but it's completely dependent on your setup. Don't forget, you're not actually losing direct ammo with the flechette, whereas I forgot to mention the AP rounds, you do still get that plus 15 damage you would have got with the triple O buckshot, but you lose so much ammo, it becomes really not very viable. Whereas, as I said, with the flechette, you don't lose anything. You lose that 7 damage, which on some builds will mean 0, unless you're shooting at ridiculous ranges. Which, of course, the flechette is made for, but it has a range compensator. You are going to do more damage over range than you would with something with more damage, which is an interesting effect, which doesn't work all the time, but maybe it was just on More Crasher. I felt it was exceptionally effective. So I'm actually quite behind the flechette, and I'm not entirely sure why. Don't forget, it is still not affected by the fully loaded aced out skill, so that's something to keep in mind when choosing between flechette and standard rounds. But I can definitely use these lines of sight a little more comfortably with the flechette. So whereas the rat's weapon, or ammo I should say, maybe the AP rounds, the flechette really shines on things like Big Oil, Crossroads, as you're seeing here on More Crasher, and it's actually really quite effective. As far as taking out snipers go, well, maybe it's slightly better than, as you saw earlier, with the standard ammo. I don't know, it is on More Crasher because the snipers aren't too far away, but you still see me taking quite a few shots to get them out of here. But like I say, working along large lines of sight, it does say it's armor piercing as well, which I don't know whether I necessarily feel, but on higher difficulties, when there's more armored enemies, it may be worth picking up then. Definitely my favourite, despite the awesomeness of the high explosive, as far as actually being effective within missions, but you do have to weigh up whether you want to run fully loaded or not. It's definitely a good perk for shotguns. It's definitely one you're going to really have to consider. I somehow feel like that is where the tweak needs to be to buff these shotguns with their new ammo types. But flechette gets my big thumbs up of approval. A really good ammo type for specific missions and scenarios. How does this weapon stack up with a silencer? It's always worth looking at. If you have the silence perks, naturally it'll do better than it does for me right now, but I honestly don't think it's too weak. As a potential silenced stealth sidearm, it really isn't a terrible shout. It works almost as well as the locomotive. However, its concealment just doesn't get nearly as low, so it's not as effective for the stealth part. But I feel coming out of that, the damage it drops really doesn't hinder it that too greatly because of its higher fire rate and potential clip size and ammo capacity. So it's definitely something to think about, but on the whole I would prefer to keep away from the silencer. It's only going to reduce your damage over time, which is often not worth the risk. So now we've covered all the available ways to run this shotgun, I feel like it's worth looking at it on the whole. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to put it next to its only competitor, which is the famous Locomotive. Everyone's favourite shotgun, and for the longest time my favourite shotgun, and unfortunately it still is in that secondary slot. The Striker just cannot compete. Its damage is that much lower, where in Death Wish it just won't be cutting the mark. It's really not that bad over range and with flechette and occasionally explosive rounds, and it does have some unique utility with that greater clip size on the easier difficulties, but I feel like the Locomotive is just that little bit more steady and reliable, really. Damage numbers, as I said, it's far lower than the Locomotive, so I don't feel like it's right to gear this towards damage, which is why I would choose something more along the lines of flechette or high explosive. The primary issue is it's not got the world's fastest reload speed, which if it did have, I suppose there is argument where you could say you could pump out more damage over time. It has a faster fire rate, significantly no pump time, and that's why it does excel at firing out explosives to stun and knock away shields and things along those lines. But as far as actually clearing out rooms, it's not going to be quite as effective. Maybe a better corridor gun, but I feel like the Locomotive on the whole actually appreciates the AP more. So you definitely want to consider the Locomotive with some sort of ammunition customization over this gun, unless you're really going for that nostalgia factor of a gun that you recognize from other games, really enjoy using, and it certainly is satisfying. We've talked about the noise it makes. It's a particularly nice noise with the suppressor, something to factor in, because remember, a lot of the combat is arcadey. It's about having fun when doing it, and that's why I find that running it with high explosives as a secondary can be a really fun way just to relax playing the game. However, if you're deadly serious trying to complete missions like Watch Dogs on Death Wish, your only real option is to maybe run it with flechette if you follow my advice with standard ammo, or just to keep to the Locomotive. It is on the whole better, and unless you're challenging yourself, it's a better pick. I suppose there is argument to say if you have perfect accuracy with it, there is potential for higher damage output, but I just don't feel like anyone's consistency is going to be high enough to keep up with its only competitor, as I said, the Locomotive, and it fails to beat it to that top spot in the shotgun secondary category. So that is my overall opinion on the Street Sweeper. Still a lot of fun to use. I definitely wouldn't discount it. I think I may actually use it more than the Locomotive just because it's that bit more fun and new. But again, I've got to review this from a sort of impartial, we need to complete heists point of view, and it's definitely not quite as effective in the long run. That's a lot for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed and can take something from this, which shotgun you want to use. If you do choose to buy the DLC, after I've reviewed all the weapons, I will review the DLC on it as a whole, I should say. I hope you guys look forward to that. That should be out around about this coming Friday. So thanks, see you all in the next one.